Jerry, for being here tonight.
I'm going to thank you. Should I thank Dana too? I was just going to say thank you, Holly, and thanks all the great folks at the Wiregrass.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see. Okay, I'm going to go straight into your bio. Jerry was born in Selma, Alabama, as most people know, but he is based in Atlanta, Georgia, and you've been there for quite a while, right? When did you move to Atlanta?
1980.
1980. Okay, so it's been a minute. You primarily work throughout the Southeast, taking photos in this region. You focus your work in the traditions of documentary and portrait photography.
Mm-hmm.
His work in the Black Belt region of Alabama was published by the Georgia Museum of Art in 2017. This monograph, Black Belt Color, focuses on the unique cultural landscape of the Black Belt region. We actually shared a Bitter Southerner article about that.
Yes, that's a great article.
His first monograph, Facing South, Portraits of Southern Artists, was published at the University of Alabama Press in 2012 and features portraits of 100 Southern artists. And Jerry's most recent body of work, The Heart of Selma, opened this past September, which I think you're going to be speaking a little bit about tonight. Siegel's work is in many public, private, and corporate collections. I can't name them all, but I will tell you they include the High Museum of Art, Georgia Museum of Art, Birmingham Museum of Art, the Mocha, Georgia, Ogden Museum of Southern Art, the Telfair Museum Jepson Center of the Arts in Savannah, Georgia, and the Wiregrass Museum of Art, as well as many other Southeastern U.S. museums. Siegel was awarded the grand prize of the first Artadia Award in Atlanta in 2009. And he is represented by Spalding Nix Fine Art in Atlanta. So with that being said, again, thanks so much for being here. And I'm going to mosey on out of this.
Can I share my screen now?
Yes, I'm going to give you the, there we go.
There we go. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Holly, for being hosting this, and thanks to all the wonderful folks at the Wiregrass for having me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am, my work, and how I got here, and what I've been working on in the past and recently. To get started, I was born and raised in Selma, Alabama. My father was born in Selma, as was his father, so we have a long generations of Selmians. My mother was born in Nashville, Tennessee, and wrote with Minnie Pearl as a young lady. I'm one of 4 siblings, and although both of my parents have been gone for quite some time, the 4 of us have held on to the family home and keep a strong connection to Selma. Selma was a great place to grow up. It was, all of the history with the famous march of Martin Luther King across the Pettus Bridge, which was instrumental in passing the Voting Rights Act. So there's a lot of history there. But for me, I was only 7 when they crossed the bridge, so I don't really remember a lot of that. For me, it was an idyllic place to grow up. No stress other than school, and I was just a terrible student. I wasn't stupid, I just couldn't get focused on it. I figured that out. But I finally made my way to the University of South Alabama and started college on probation. Probably one of the few people that that started on probation. And on my 19th birthday, I got a camera and started taking pictures. A friend of mine took pictures all the time, and I really loved what he's doing. So I got a camera and started shooting sunrises and sunsets and butterflies. And I just remember this picture I shot, one of the first rolls, and was having a great time. And a friend said, let's do this photography class together at night. It was a night class at South. And I wasn't really interested, but I wanted to spend time with her. So we went and did the night class. At the end of the class, the professor did a slide presentation of all the great masters, and Deanne Arvis' work came up, and he showed several slides and talked about her. and I was hooked. And I've been hooked ever since. I went from shooting, like I said, sunsets and the general stuff to spending time on the streets in New Orleans, Mobile, Selma. Those were my haunts. My brother was living in New Orleans, so I spent lots of time in New Orleans. Mardi Gras in New Orleans, Mardi Gras in Mobile, and really, just became my total focus was shooting pictures. And I guess it was after 4 years of school time, the school said again, why don't we try probation again? Things aren't going really well. And Daddy said, why don't you come home? Let's regroup. We know you're not stupid. You'll find your niche. So I went back to Selma and we talked about things. And he said, you take a lot of pictures. Aren't there any photography schools? And a roommate I had in Mobile said there's Ringling, had told me about Ringling, and I'd heard about the Art Institute. Mom and Daddy were in Atlanta, saw the Art Institute, went in and came back with a filled out application and said, this looks pretty good. We think you should try this. About 2 months later, 3 months, I was living in Atlanta, going to the Art Institute. And while I was still a student, I started working as an assistant for Arrington Hindley, which is the guy you see there in the yellow jacket. This was on a trip we made to Colorado on a commercial advertising account. And he was a big time advertising photographer. And he became my mentor and best friend. And we just, I learned so much more there. I don't even think I went to school much the last couple of quarters, but they knew I was learning so much more being on set every day, shooting jobs. So in 1986, after him telling me to, you're ready to go, you need to go, and firing me several times, he finally said, we're going to have a go away party. It's time for you to go away, do your own thing. And they invited some other photographers, and we had burgers and beers and shot pool, and they sent me out on my way. And I started shooting corporate clients, advertising work. Boys and Girls Club was a longtime client I shot for years and years. This was a portrait I did of Colin Powell. He was on the board at the time. Jimmy Carter was a picture I did for Habitat for Humanity. Hank Aaron. And this was an attorney that I did lots of work for, and I have continued to do lots of work for law firms in town. It's a big part of my business still, the commercial side of it. But all the while that I was shooting all these commercial projects, I continued to shoot my love, which was portraits. And whenever I went anywhere, I had my camera. This was a friend in Selma. I set up one Thanksgiving and shot some portraits. I love shooting in the studio. This was a guy that I met named Johnny Hawaiian. And we actually found him working on a advertising project, and we needed inks for a Xerox type thing. So we decided to use a tattooed man. Project fell through, but I still got to photograph Johnny Hawaiian and made some really fun images, and it was fun. Jeffrey worked at the noodle factory next door. So I found people wherever I could, on the streets in Selma, driving around out in the country. This was one of the first times that I actually, it's hard. Sometimes you don't know what to say when you see somebody. How do you approach people? And I kept driving past the house. I don't think they noticed. And I finally stopped and said, hey, how y'all doing? It's a nice day. I'm a photographer. I document the South. Boy, this picture goes back to the early 80s. I don't know if that was really true then, but they were very nice, and I shot some pictures. Maddie was somebody that I just ran across one afternoon driving, saw her fishing, and we talked about fishing and good, frying fish and the best way to do it. So I continued to, work on my personal work the whole time that I was doing the commercial work. This was in Atlanta, actually, on Ponce. This was a woman named Elizabeth that I photographed. And it's one of the things that I love about photography. I photographed her a long time ago. She actually worked for my uncle, who's the other Jerry Siegel, who owned a gallery in Selma, and was just a great guy. I mean, we were really close, and he ended up being a huge support. But I was visiting him and his mother one day, and Elizabeth was there, and she let me snap a few pictures. And probably 30 something years later, my wife was working with Arts Revive in Selma on a project, and she and the board and some other people went to Chattanooga for a trip to learn from their EDA what they had been doing and what was successful. And one of the ladies on the trip was a lady named Thomasine Johnson, whose son is Michael Johnson, who played for the Cincinnati Bengals. And they were talking, and Thomasine said to my wife, Patty, are you related to the Siegels in Houston Park? And she said, oh yeah, that's my husband's family. We're very close to them. She said, my mother used to work with Mr. Siegel. And Patty pulled out her phone, and I guess I had recently shared this picture with her, texted it to her, and she showed it to Thomasine, and Thomasine looked at it, started crying. And she said, God, that's the best picture my mom ever seen. She said, I don't like to say that about my work, but the point is, it touched her so much that she said, that's exactly the way I remember my mom. And that's why I love shooting pictures. And when people said, do you like shooting, who's your favorite portrait? Was it Colin Powell, something like William Eggleston, one of the famous artists? I said, no, it's Elizabeth, or it's Ella, which was a kid. I shoot a lot of family portraits, and I love doing that because those portraits mean a lot to people. I love having pictures in museums and seeing work published in magazines. But the pictures that I shoot of Ella and Elizabeth, I was at Thomasine's house not long ago, and Elizabeth is on the wall in her house, and they live with it every day, and it'll be passed down to Michael and to his kids. So the people of the family portraits and the pictures like this that I've captured of people mean so much more. So while I was shooting all these portraits, I had met in 1989 Mary Ward Brown, who is an important Alabama writer, and she and Crawford Gillis, who is a painter in Selma. Mary is in Marion, Alabama, became two really, really great friends and real mentors to me, and supported me and pushed me and really got me here today as much as anybody. My wife later. But they were really important. And I photographed Mary and I photographed Crawford. I really liked the portraits, and I photographed John Lapsley, who is another artist in Selma. And, I think John or Crawford said, you need to go photograph Charles Shannon. I don't know if you know who Charles Shannon is, but he is the artist. He was a great artist in his own right, but he was the one who brought us all of the Bill Traylor works. Without Charles Shannon, we might not ever have known who the folk artist Bill Traylor is. And Charles and John and Crawford, they were all part of a group called New South in Montgomery in the 30s. So I had done these portraits, and Bill Allen, who is the director of the Georgia Museum of Art, is also a friend of theirs, a friend of my uncle's, and his son became a good friend of mine, said, you have a really neat series here going of late career Southern artists. I think you should pursue it. So shortly thereafter, he hired me to photograph Lamar Dodd. This is Lamar Dodd at the University of Georgia. The portrait I made for Bill's book that he was doing on Lamar was a more formal portrait with coat and tie in his studio. But this was a moment that I caught when we were on break, and really loved that portrait. So I pursued this, and this is the body work that became Facing South, 100 Facing South Portraits of Southern Artists. It's 100 portraits of Southern artists. My brother connected me with a gallery in New Orleans, and she introduced me to some of the top Louisiana artists. This is Enrique Alferez, who was 94 when I photographed him. He was a sculptor. He wrote with Pancho Villa in the Mexican Revolution and told these great stories. George Dureau, who's a really important Louisiana artist. He's a painter. You can see the drafts work behind him, an incredible draftsman, but also a photographer. And he was a huge influence. If you know Robert Mapplethorpe's work, he was a huge influence on Mapplethorpe, and really changed his style from the slice of life to the more stylized work. And if you look up Dureau's work, you can see that semblance. Then there were certain artists. This project started with me photographing artists that I knew. And then I started reaching out to people like curators that I knew and other people saying, who do you suggest that I shoot? And they would give me names. And then there were names that I knew I wanted to shoot, like Bill Christenberry, and William Eggleston. And they were tough. It's hard to, they were as nice as they could be. It was early on in the project, and shooting another photographer made me their statue was pretty intimidating, but I think they turned out well. This is Marty Schuyler Clay, who is a photographer in Mississippi. She's Eggleston's cousin, and he said I should go photograph her. And this is the site where Emmett Till's body was dropped at Grayball's Landing in at the Tallahatchie River. But it's always been one of my favorite portraits, not just because of the site, but I just love everything about this one. It really worked. Oops. And this is Radcliffe Bailey, who is one of Atlanta's art stars that I really wanted to meet and photograph. So by doing this project, it allowed me to reach out and meet people that I wanted to meet, have great visits in their studio, and made some great friends. And then just a few years ago, this is Yvonne Wells. And Yvonne is going to be, actually, y'all need to know this, she's going to be in a show called What I Knew How to Do that opens next Thursday, the 21st at the Wiregrass. So get out and see the show. This portrait was shot for the Montgomery Museum of Art, and they were doing a show of my work, and they were showing my portraits along with works by artists in their collection. And there were certain people that they thought would be great to add to my collection as well as to feature in the show. So Yvonne was one of the people that I photographed. Amazing quilter from Tuscaloosa. Charlie Lucas was another early artist that I photographed, and he is in the same show next week at the Wiregrass. So you don't want to miss this show. And then I've continued to work on the Facing South series. I just photographed a new artist a couple of weeks ago. I've got a couple more lined up. And then in 2000, after Daddy died, I went back to Selma. I was kind of in a little bit of a rut, and I had bought a new panorama camera and started photographing things around Selma, and really enjoyed what I was shooting. Went back to Atlanta, showed them to a friend, and she said, wow, you've got a great thing going here. You ought to pursue this. It's funny how these series start. So I continued to shoot with the panorama. This was one of my favorite restaurants that Mary and I used to go to. They made the best burgers, called J&R's in Marion. And so I started shooting all around Selma and the surrounding area, and decided what I really wanted to do for a minute was stop. And I got my 8x10 camera, my big Deerdorf, and took it to Selma and started shooting things that were iconic to me as a kid growing up. This is the YMCA in Selma, where I spent so many days playing basketball. This is in Uncle Jerry's house. He lived to be 85. His mother was 106. And at the end of the evening, they would take turns riding up the chair. So many great memories in that house. This is the house that we still have that I grew up in. The only house that the 4 siblings ever had. I've had multiple houses, but we're Southern Jews who spent 62 of the last 63 Christmases together in that house pre-COVID. Since COVID, we've missed last year. So hopefully we'll be back soon. This is the Temple Mishkan, Israel that I grew up in Selma. So it was nice to reconnect with some of these places again and make these pictures. And then the way projects work for me, they just kind of morph. So I decided that what I wanted to do was do a project on what was left of the congregation. When I was a kid, Selma's had 3 Jewish mayors, and there were over 100 families when I was a kid. And at the time I started thinking about this project, there were 12 Jews in the congregation. By the time I finally set up the shoot to start, there were 10 Jews left. So we all met on a cold January morning, and I asked, everybody stood together and said, all right, we're ready. And I said, no, each of y'all need to go to your spot where you always sit, because that's, I know we did it in Temple. I've been to church with people and families always go to the same spot. So everybody went to their spot. I think it really helped to show how empty the congregation was, because when I was a kid, it was full. So I worked on this project for quite a few years, and it kind of petered out, I guess you would say now. Now there are only 3 Jews left in the congregation. They're still holding services and holding on. But I consider this a portrait. You know, I mean, they're portraits of people, but I consider myself a portrait photographer. And this falls under that category of there's under the Black Belt, which was the book I produced in 2017, you have Black Belt color. But within that, you have 10 Jews left, which is a portrait of a community holding on. You have, I did a whole series on the house that I grew up in. And it's a portrait of our home. And even though there's no people in these pictures, I think that there's humanity in all of them. And so each of these things still, to me, are a portrait. So it's a portrait of the house I grew up in, the portrait of the community, the portrait of the small town of Selma or Marion, the portrait of the region. And then I decided the 8x10 was too cumbersome, and I just started shooting with smaller cameras again so that I could capture more, do more. And it was more along the way that I used to shoot a lot with 8x10 in my commercial work, but I really wanted, I'm a more of an intuitive shooter, especially with people and portraits, and I wanted to have that flexibility. So I started going out with the smaller cameras and documenting everything that I saw. To take a line from my friend Susan Todd Rocky, I was in a show with her about the house, and it was called Responding to Home. And that's what I really feel about these works. These are places that are my haunts. I get in the car, I drive around, I go in little country markets, meet people. And whatever I see that I respond to, I take pictures of. I don't really go out with any preconceived ideas of what I'm looking for. I just go shoot. There are a few things I knew I wanted to shoot. Homecoming, which we'll come up to in just a minute, the state fair. There were several things that were important to that were, lodged in my mind. I did a lot of work at the fair. I did a lot of work on religion, as you can see in some of these pictures. Love going to the fair. I remembered as a kid, did a lot of pictures of sports, which was a big part of my growing up. Friday Night Lights and all that. And this was the picture I did at homecoming. And I'd remembered the hoop skirts when I was a kid in school there. And I really wanted to go back and photograph it again. And the girls let me come in and photograph once they got their dress on, obviously, but their hair were in rollers and there was stuff everywhere, and their moms were all helping them get ready, and we went out to shoot. And I walked out with them so I could see the whole process, and I was fixing to run around to the other side and went, whoa, no, this is where I need to be. And it really became one of my favorite images. And they wore the hoop skirts up until just, I think, a year or two ago, I was told, and the students decided they no longer wanted to do it. But I have another great picture from the front, and all the girls, they pull up their hoop skirts and they've got on red Converse tennis shoes, and they've got on cowboy boots and funky socks. It's really fun. So these are some of the other things that I've done in and around the South. More recent images. This was a lady named Ernestine that I ran into coming home to Selma. This is on the back roads in Otagoville. And I saw her on the side of the road, and you can kind of see in the back, there's another woman down the road. And she was pulling collards. They were growing wild on the side of the road. This was Jimmy. Him and a buddy were riding horses out in Perry County. And it's a little girl I call Love Bug. That's what her t-shirt says. And I just kept going. She's so cute. And does she have a much chance? Be interesting to see how she grows up. So then about 3 years ago, pre-pandemic, about a year or so before the pandemic, I met Josh, and this was, he was a dancer, and he came to the studio to work with Patrick, who's a former assistant who was using my studio. And during a break, Patrick and I, Josh and I started talking, and we were talking about all his dance and what he does, and he travels to Israel and he does all this work. And I said, that's cool. And he said, yeah, but I'm also a drag queen. I said, oh, that's cool. And I had photographed a friend who used to cut my hair, my wife's hair, when I had hair, and my son's hair. And I'd done pictures of Steve, and looking back on them now, they were a lot better than I thought they were, but it didn't do what I wanted. So I said, let's do a shoot. I've been looking for a project to do in Selma. I'd love to shoot with you. And he said, okay. So he came over to the studio. And my idea before he got there was a diptych, because all these drag artists have these personas, but who are they when they're not the drag artist? And that was my original idea. I realized after getting into this project, that's their persona more than Josh is one of the ones that has a separate persona, that he is the dancer. But most of them, that is their main gig. And that's how they live most of their life, as drag artists. So this was the first thing that I had in mind. But then once he got there and we started shooting, we did the beauty portrait of Josh, or Brigitte Bidet. And Brigitte, we did the portrait, and I said, okay, well, let's take off the wig and see where we're going. And we'll start taking the makeup off so we can do the other portrait. And as he took his wig off, she took her wig off, excuse me, it just dawned on me. It's like, no, we have to do this in steps. So this was the very first one, and took her wig off, earrings off, took off her top, took off some makeup, almost back to Josh. And then there's Josh. And I call this reveal, and they're all printed over 6 feet on one image. And it became just a great series. I had not ever seen this done. We did a show at Spalding's, and it was great. It was a great opening. All the girls came. Orchid, there were 3 or 4 of them who came in full guiche, is what they call it when they're in full makeup, and had a great time. And there were 3 parts to the series. There was the reveal, there was the interim shots, I call them, and this was when we would stop as they were taking away their portrait. You can see here how Alex built out of styrofoam the hips, and to give himself an ass, and to give himself the shape that he had, that you can see in this picture, compared to the one on the end when he's in his jeans. But it was fascinating, because these felt like these were the real portraits to me. These were the one that captured who they were. As Elizabeth's daughter said, Thomasine said, you capture her exactly the way I see her. These are the ones that I think really capture who Orchid is, and who Alex is, and who Taylor Van Pelt are. It captures the more intimate side of who they are. This was Paige, Paege Turner, Paige Turner. And it's a beautiful portrait, but when you put them in full guiche and you put them in front of the camera, they all perform. So going back to this real quick, you get a more intimate portrait of who they really are in that downtime. This was J. Bella Banks and Brigitte. And it was a great series. And then pandemic hit and everything got kind of layway. But I've done one more session with Brigitte, and hopefully now things are opening up again, we'll be able to get back on that. And then the most recent body of work that I did was a project in Selma. And the show that's opening next week at the Wiregrass, Paul Barrett is the curator. And he's a good buddy of mine. And we worked together on a project in Lake City, South Carolina at Art Fields. And I did a show of the black belt work there. And as part of that, we did a public art project where we did big, giant wheat paste portraits of Charlie Lucas and Thornton Dial and several other folk artists. And it was a great project that we did together. So went to Selma and proposed the idea of doing something similar to that, but with Selma people. So what we came up with, the Black Belt Benefit Group in Selma did the project, and Paul and I worked on it together. So we did 24 portraits. And the way that it worked is we didn't want to pick portraits. We didn't want to say, why'd you pick this person, that person? So we went to people in town who are already getting publicity for the good work they were doing. And we said, we want you to nominate people that you think are doing positive things in Selma to make Selma a better place and are not getting the recognition they deserve. So we ended up with a list. We photographed 24 people. And from that 24 people, we then had 3 curators, Jennifer Jankowskis in Montgomery Museum of Fine Art, Ann Colleen Smith at Spelman, and Joy West, who's a photographer, who's her name. She was part of a fellowship at University of Alabama. So the 3 of them made the selects for the final 12, and they became vinyl banners on Water Avenue at the base of the Pettus Bridge in Selma. And it was a great project. I mean, it was so much fun to shoot. I only knew out of the 24, I think 2 of the people before I started the project. And they were all just so welcoming, so nice. Couldn't have been better. This is Ebony Mcgeary. She worked at the Ebonite missions. But they feed 500 to 600 people a week, I think. And they feed them in the facilities. They take Meals on Wheels sort of thing. It's not called Meals on Wheels, but they go to people's homes and supply meals. This was Ad Bradford Kennedy. And she's at the front of the stadium in Selma. And when COVID hit, she was one of the people that were giving out all the vaccines for all the Selma residents at the stadium. They were lined up. So the people that are doing positive things. And this was George Sally, and he was a foot soldier on the bridge in 1965, and he was beaten at the base of the bridge by a trooper. And he goes back to the base of the bridge every morning and he prays for the trooper who beat him. And then he stops on the Montgomery side of the bridge and where he was beat. Then he goes to the other side and there's a park there. And he sits there and he talks to anybody that wants to, have a conversation. And he talks about Selma, and he talks about the struggle and civil rights and where we are and where we're going. And he's really a great representation of Selma. So that was a project that I just finished. The Facing South project is ongoing, as well as the Black Belt Color project. My projects are more open-ended. The 10 Jews series ended. I did a project called Geraldine of a woman in Birmingham, which was a great exhibition, and about 40-something portraits, but most of my projects continue to run. So that's a little bit of who I am and how I got here. I guess we can open it up to see if anybody has any questions. Are you still there, Holly?
Yep, coming back. Let me just change some things here.
And I apologize. I was supposed to change this to a better mode, so you didn't see my window. But
and then if you want to stop sharing your screen, and then if anyone has questions, feel free to. You can send them in the chat, or there's a Q&A box. Let me just open. Give people a few minutes. And while we're waiting, like Jerry said, we have 2 new shows opening next week. Art After Hours is on Thursday. But we've got a show in the main gallery, which is the Charlie Lucas and Yvonne Wells exhibit that Jerry mentioned. And then we also have a Sydney Foster show happening in Bloomberg. And then we still have Nice Work If You Can Get It down in the Dove Gallery. So please come by next week. if you are available.
I feel very fortunate. Photography has been an amazing thing. There's so many things, stories I could have told. But the one thing I'll say is being a photographer has taken me places and to people that I never would have imagined. I photographed surgery. I sat on the Hawks and photographed the Hawks on the floor and photographed the Atlanta Hawks for 15 years. I photographed CEOs. I photographed Jane Fonda and Hank Aaron. I've met all these incredible artists and people. I went to a broom handle factory in South Georgia, which is the largest broom handle factory manufacturer in the world. Just the kind of people that I've met, the places that I've been able to get into, like surgery. I mean, who would have ever thought, you know, the camera just opened so many doors. And it's an invitation, not an invitation, but it's a word I'm trying to say. It gives you the ability to approach anybody that you want to talk to. The camera is almost a license for me to walk up to people and say, "Hey, how you doing? I'm a photographer. I'd like to talk to you." You know, it's been a real gift. You know, I love doing it.
I wonder if that's like awkward. Like, how do you just approach a stranger with a camera? But
most of the time, actually, I mean, if you're on the street and I have my camera, it's obvious. One of the things I do, there was some pictures in there of the little girl that I said was Love Bug. She was there with her sister and her mom and dad and another guy. And when I saw them, I wanted to get out. I'd seen the Confederate flag. I wanted to engage and see what they were doing. But when I stopped and there was a guy, his picture's not in here. But normally when I see people like that, I get out. I leave my cameras in the car. And I get out and I go talk to them. And, you know, we talk about the weather. We talk about Alabama football. We talk about Auburn football. I mean, you can always, you learn to kind of just talk to people. I mean, you look around the yard and you see, I saw an Alabama koozie, so I knew they were Alabama fans. So it's something easy to bond with. But I usually don't start with, I'm a photographer, or I'll introduce myself as that. Like with the parents of the little girl, I said, "Hey, how y'all doing? It's a beautiful day. I'm a photographer. I document the South. I'm just out riding around. I'd love to spend some time with y'all if you don't mind." And then we open the conversation to more stuff. It's all, you know, like I said, I'm an intuitive shooter, but it's also an intuitive process where you just kind of have to read people. Luckily, my parents were, you know, good about, somebody asked me something the other day. It's like, how do you do this? It's like, everything is the way that I was raised. They were very social people. So not say I was good at it, but, you know, they always said, say hello and all that. You learn how to talk to people.
Yeah. Well, I've got a couple questions if you're ready.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the first question is from Paul. He said, are there artists whose portraits you particularly want to make who you haven't worked with yet?
Yeah, on the top of my list. Actually, this project started out with late career artist, and I think the youngest in the book, there was 2 people that were 40, and then the rest of them were like late 50s up to 100. And so I like mature artists, but there's several around town that are not they're definitely mature artists, but they're not of that age. Jiha Moon is an artist that's doing great things here in Atlanta. Fahamu Peku, who I've already talked to, and he's open to being photographed. And there's a young artist who's just exploding now named Shaniqua Gay, who's doing great work. And they're kind of at the top of my list.
Okay, the next question is, how does the Black community react to your work?
I think it's fine, because the most important thing to me when I shoot pictures is respect. You know, I respect the people. Some of the pictures I've shot, there's some pictures I shot on another day at a different house. And well, one of them was in here with the skull can, and it says warning. And if you notice, there was an SS tattoo. and there's another one. Those are the kind of things. There's a couple of pictures from that series and that kind of thing that I think I could sell the images by reaching out to a magazine, but I won't do it because I don't know how you could use those pictures. Without it being used in an article about how bad this is. And they were really nice people to me. They welcomed me into their homes and to their yards, and we took pictures and spent time together. So I won't show a picture that I think is gonna put it in a situation where it puts them in a bad light. You know, I can't control how people view pictures. When I title pictures, it's something like ticket booth was a picture. You know, I don't try to give it any kind of title because I don't want it to be influenced in any way. I did a painting once and my uncle said, "What's the name of it?" And I said, "Untitled." And he says, "Well, you got to give it a title." And I said, "Sensing the End." And he said, "No, that's not it at all." And I said, "That's why I don't give titles, because I don't want to influence the viewer." So I got off on a rabbit trail, but I think because of the way that I approach the people that I shoot and the respect that I have for the people I shoot, because they're giving me of their time and allowing me to make the pictures, I think that I'm always honest with them and with the photographs. And I'm not trying to put anything in a bad light. I'm just, again, I'm responding to what I see on all kind of levels. Somebody asked me about the picture that I showed, which was the girl with the gun at the fair, and it's called Shooter because she's shooting the gun. And when I shot that picture, it was a nice picture, and everybody really liked it. It got a lot of people liked it. But then after 2016, attitudes changed, and all of a sudden people started seeing the Confederate flag in it. And somebody said, "You asked me about that." And I said, "When I photographed her, I didn't see the Confederate flag. I saw a girl with a gun and all these colors, and I was, the noise of the fair and the smell of the fair. And I was just soaking in all this color and the girl with the gun. I didn't even notice the flag, but it's become it's been written about multiple times. It's in a show called Southbound that's been traveling, and everywhere it goes, it seems to be one of the handful that's picked out. But I don't try to make any statements with my work. So I think people feel okay about it all across the board.
Okay. Okay. The next question is there a series you would love to do looming in your future plans?
I don't know. There's a lot of things that I would like to shoot. There's more probably people I'd like to shoot, different ways I would like to look at things that I've been doing and re-examining the way I've been doing it. But I love being in the black belt. There's so much that you can do there. Again, there's all these different segments to that. I want to continue that and facing south. There's no particular series that I'm going, I gotta get to this. Not that I can think of.
Okay. Well, I guess we can wait for, I think if anyone has any more questions, now's the time to ask. And then I actually wrote down a couple of questions whenever you were talking, but I mean, I guess your ultimate goal is what I'm interested in. Is it like for historical reasons that you want to preserve, like a moment in history and to like document that history and, sort of tell a story with it? Or, what is your goal with photographing people in the South and artists too? But seems like really drawn to the culture of the South. And so I'm wondering, what's your goal?
Well, I think I've been doing this, like I said, I was a commercial photographer, and my first show I did was like 2005. So 15 years is a long time, but in the span of an artist's career, it's not a real long time. And when I started, I just wanted to, it was kind of a fluke. I'd done these pictures of dolls, and a friend they were called Damaged. And it was just it was neat that somebody wanted to do a show. And when I was shooting the artist series, I always thought it'd be cool to do a book. But I never thought in terms of that. It was just loving to make just love to make pictures. I think as as my career has progressed, and I'm in a bunch of museums now, and I've done a couple of books, it's taking on a different, more feel. And I do hope that the work that I've done will find a home somewhere. There's lots and lots of photographers shooting in the South. A lot of people come through the Black Belt because of Selma and Marion and all the history. But I've been shooting consistently in the Black Belt. Some of the images go back to the 80s when I first started shooting, late 70s. Sorry, that rang. It took my train of thought. What was I saying?
You were talking about.
Oh, but I've been shooting in that region for 20 years. So I hope at some point that body of work would be important to show what was happening in rural Alabama and small town Alabama in the Black Belt over this 20-year period now, 30-year period, wherever it ends up. But I think it does become a good document of what was happening during that time. And the same thing with the artist portraits. Marilyn Lawfer was the director at the Jewel Collins Smith Museum. And she said, there's a lot of people, I know artists here who have, several artists I can think off the top of my head that are shooting artists in town. But I don't know many that have done it with the focus. I photographed over 200 artists. And she said, you've got a real collection here. Everybody knows who Thornton Dial is, but you've photographed a lot of people you've got a document that represents 100 Southern artists. And I hope that, at some point I'll be able to do another one and make it 200, not 200 more, but another 100. And, that's something that I just love doing it. I was talking about the camera and how it takes me places, the journey of, if you had just said you get to go hang out with 200 different artists, spend time in their studios and see how they work. Even if I wasn't taking pictures, most people would love to do that.
Oh yeah, I would.
Yeah, but being able to, meet them and make their portraits, and it keeps giving back, because I don't know what my reputation is, but I've gotten enough notoriety from doing the book and doing the shows at museums that I get lots of calls of people saying, oh, we're doing something on Thornton Dial, or we're doing something on Yvonne Wells, or I need a picture of Benjamin Jones or Ruth Laxon. And I photographed a lot of those people. So it's nice that, that work keeps finding a place.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. And
thank you. Thank you all for.
Also thanks you for presenting, and she appreciates you being here tonight. So thanks everyone else for being here. We have our next artist talk. It's going to be a book arts talk on November the 4th. The artists that will be chatting with us is Mary Ann Sampson, John Kofelt, and David Sandlin. Their work can now be viewed down in Dove Gallery within the exhibit. Nice work if you can.
Awesome.
Thanks again, Jerry, so much. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Holly.
Bye, everyone.
Good evening. Bye, everybody.